All right. So today we're going to be talking about what to eat to optimize blood sugar, and going through some really good nutrition stuff. And so I know typically you guys are used to seeing Reagan, and he's got a couple patient appointments this morning. So I took over the webinar. So hopefully you guys are excited to hear a new voice, even though our voices are almost identical. Yes, Reagan is Reagan and I are brothers, and so really excited to share some really cool stuff on just what to eat to optimize blood sugar and get into some nutritional tactics. So don't be afraid to type any questions into the chat box. I'll try to answer any specific questions and everything. And so what we're going to be covering, one of the things which a lot of you guys already probably know is how to transition from a high carb to a low carb diet. Sometimes that's very challenging, especially when you do have blood sugar issues, but you're working on blood sugar optimization. And so that's really important, but sometimes it can be a challenge for folks. How to choose the best foods for blood sugar transformation, how to cook your food, introduction to the bulletproof diet, which you guys have probably heard us talk about the bulletproof diet at different intervals. One thing at East West, we're not necessarily sold or totally bought into a specific diet. What we like about the bulletproof diet is it gives you a spectrum, and it's a lot more open to, let's see how your body reacts, because we believe everybody's body is a little bit different. And so how different foods react to you may be a little bit different for someone else. So you want to pay attention to that. How to sleep like a baby. And hopefully that's a good baby. I was probably one of the luckiest guys when our kids were born. My daughter, I think second night she slept like 12 hours straight. And my son, the same thing. So I'm a very lucky person. So how to sleep like that baby, not necessarily up all the time. And then the emotional connection as well. I don't know if I'll get into all of those just based on timing. But yeah, if you guys have questions, ring them in, and excited to cover this info today. So let's jump in. First, before we get there, I want to talk a little bit about the thyroid system. Your blood sugar can it can affect how your thyroid hormones work, and your thyroid hormones can affect your blood sugar. So they go hand in hand. So getting those optimized is really important. This here, we'll just talk about. I'm going to skip a little bit on some of those details, but I want to give you some education on thyroid metabolism and just talk a little bit about how your thyroid functions. And actually, just for the sake of it, I want to jump into the nutrition piece. I should have started on this slide. Sorry, I was a little bit ahead of game there. So anyone familiar with Ansel Keys that's on the webinar right now? And you may have heard this story before. I like to kind of dive into it because I think it's interesting. You've probably heard Reagan say it before, but in the 60s, Ansel Keys was a physiologist that he was a consultant for Eisenhower, and Eisenhower's going through heart attacks, had all these things. And so Ansel Keys, he did a little bit of research and found that, according to him, saturated fats was the devil. That was what was causing heart attacks and all these diseases. And so you can see here, you got the New York Times. He was on the cover there in 1961, saying that saturated fats were the enemy. And now, fast forward to 2014, and actually more accurate and recent research data, and even some of the research was done long before this, but they found actually saturated fats weren't the issue. It was actually trans fats, sugars, and some of those things that caused the issues. But what happened is, you guys, you have a president promoting, and this is where the food pyramid came from. So promoting a lot of, grains, dry toasts, breads, all those grains that are in the food pyramid. And it is actually a recipe, now that we find out about 50 years later, it's a recipe for inflammation. And so not ideal. Butter, actually butter from grass-fed cows or fat can be very good and help our body. Like, our bodies need fat. Everyone was under the impression that, okay, well, if it's got a lot of fat, that's going to make me fat. And that's not necessarily the case. It's actually sugar and things that are broken down to create sugar. And so we go into some of the most important foods to eat. So let's talk about dairy first of all. Dairy. So how I got involved in East West it's been close to about 7 years ago, or even 8. I was going through my own health crisis. I was about 50 pounds overweight, just did not feel well, had horrible energy. Was not doing great in my health. And I was in my kind of mid to later 20s and thinking, man, I should be like, I should be feeling like $1 million, and I don't. And I did go home and crash every night. I just didn't have energy to do anything. And so I actually reached out to Reagan. Reagan helped me understand, and we did some different testing and things, but through some of the testing found out that dairy and gluten were probably one of the worst foods for me. I react really negatively. Actually, now I can eat them moderately and feel okay. Obviously, I'm not promoting dairy or gluten right here, but it's been life-changing for me. And so that's actually one of my foods that I try to stay away from the most is dairy. But if I can get some organic grass-fed butter, sorry, I keep clicking the wrong buttons. So if I can get some organic grass-fed butter or ghee, I like to mix that with my coffee. I have some bulletproof coffee in the morning. So you see, this is a nice spectrum. Organic raw milk. When we were, one thing that we found when my son was going through, the transitioning from breastfeeding to just doing kind of normal milk, we actually went for raw goat's milk. And at that time, I think they just passed a law last year or so that it was okay. But before that, we had to like buy it on the black market. We'd go to the local, man, my brain's not telling me the word, the local food, the farmer's market. Sorry, everybody. So we went to the farmer's market and we had to like say, hey, we want some raw goat's milk. Can we get some? And everyone's like looking around. Okay, yeah, meet me at my car. They had to go to the car. They have it in these jars, but it was a funny experience. But you can see as you get on the other side, so the yellow spectrum, you started getting into cheeses, whether it's organic or not. Cheese is mostly casein protein, and that's one of the proteins that we find to be the most inflammatory. And that's why milk can be inflammatory as well, is because it's got a lot of casein protein. But that casein protein is harder for our body to break down. Then you can get into the even worse. So growing up, I don't know if you guys can relate to this, but all we had in our fridge was skim milk. Reagan and I grew up on a farm, but my mom, all she would have is skim milk because, she thought fat-free meant, we weren't going to get fat from it. And so, so skim milk, probably one of the worst because it's the most broken down. Cheese with mold. And mold has actually been found to be the #1 stem cell killer as well. So if you're eating a lot of moldy cheese, or moldy food, processed food, that's going to break down in your digestive tract where the crux of your villi, you have the most dense amount of stem cells. And so it can reduce that proliferation. Now let's talk about proteins. This is probably one of my favorite pieces. So proteins from grass-fed beef and lamb or pastured eggs. Duck eggs, we get those at our farmers market as well, and they're probably one of my favorites. But those are going to be, probably the most ideal. There's some different powders that you can get: hydrolyzed type 1 collagen, colostrum, beef plasma serum. Collagen and colostrum, amazing sources for protein. Whey protein concentrate is, we're not the most ideal, but it's good. Sockeye salmon, some of your fish. You want to make sure you're searching for low mercury fish. Pasture raised pork, getting more into the middle gray area. Pasture duck and goose. So if you notice on the bottom, so all forms of whey protein must be cold processed to be healthy. Whey protein isolate should be from CFM, which stands for cross-flow microfiltered. People who are sensitive to dairy should use isolate, meaning that's your whey protein isolate. That's primarily what I have to use when I ever do supplement with whey protein. Some of the more proteins to avoid: soy protein. A crazy story when I was first married. My wife and I used to eat a lot of edamame at night. Had no idea what soy was all about. We thought it was healthy because it was soy, and it was green, so that means it's healthy, right? No, that's sometimes you got to be aware of what's in the food. So we'd have edamame almost every night. We'd have a little bag of it, and about 2 months later, my wife didn't have a cycle. Like 2 months in a row, she took pregnancy tests, all this stuff, and was coming up negative, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. I reached out to Reagan, actually. Once again, he's like my consultant on everything health. And so I say, hey, what do you think's going on here? Said, I don't know. Has she been eating a lot of soy or anything? And I was like, is edamame soy? That was my question. And he's like, yeah. Have her stop that and see what happens. The estrogen in soy can cause her hormones to go completely out of whack. And lo and behold, like 3 weeks later, had her cycle and went back to normal. Luckily, it didn't. We didn't do that for an extended amount of time, because I'm sure if we wouldn't have stopped eating that, her cycle, like, it probably would have started at some point, but it would just be so irregular, and we would have never known. And so that was amazing information to get. Also, proteins with your casein protein from cheese, other pasteurized or cooked dairy, except for butter. All right, let's go into sweeteners and sugars. This is all our Achilles heel, right? Stevia, xylitol, those are actually not too bad. They don't elevate blood sugar. Some people like stevia. Some the taste is like a bitter, so you gotta pay attention to that. Raw honey, so the whole point of, even if it's raw honey, and I've seen so many people think that raw honey is healthy, and it can be good for adjusting to allergies. I've experienced that personally, but so take a spoonful of raw honey when allergy season hits, and some people can swear by it. But the sugar content, so that spikes your blood sugar regardless. It does have a lot of it's sugar. Total grams of sugar per day, you should not exceed 15 to 25 grams per day in fructose, with fructose being less than 15 grams. Ideally, especially if you're trying to optimize your blood sugar and or lose weight, anything like that, you don't want to, consuming fruits as your sugar source is probably going to be the best. And that's going to be like, a handful of, a couple handfuls of blueberries, or maybe an apple or two throughout the day. Some things like that. If for, normal, just looking for kind of regular eating, I still try to avoid sugar. If you're sweetening things with a little bit of xylitol or stevia, not going to be the end of the world though. All right, let's talk about veggies and fruits. So these are some fun ones. So what I like in the morning, my favorite is like avocados. I usually do, like, my ideal breakfast is an egg, pastured egg. I'll put avocado on top of it, put a lot of butter on the egg. I'll also put some arugula and some different greens on there, usually some chard or some collards from the garden. But really, that is like my favorite breakfast in the world. And then for lunch, usually, some sort of meats with like some ground. I enjoy some grass-fed ground beef with mixed greens, and I'll put like olive oil on it for my dressing. That's a really good lunch. And then you can do similarly at the end of the day. Maybe get some sweet potato along with some meats and some grains. That's where like Brussels sprouts with a little bit of seasoning on there can be really tasty. So some of the green area here. So avocado, cilantro, olives, parsley, asparagus, broccoli. So one thing you got to remember is you always want to cook your cruciferous vegetables. So like broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, you always want to make sure you cook that. Also, on a lot of people look at spinach as like the superfood, which it's not, because there's a lot of oxalates, and our body does not break down oxalates very well, and so it can cause more harm than good if we're exhausting those. And same with broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower. If you're eating those raw or just eating a lot in general, it's taxing on your thyroid. And so we'll see a lot of people that are doing, especially like raw smoothies with all those different type of vegetables, their thyroid gets taxed pretty intensely. And so that can spike some autoimmune markers and some other things. And so I want to watch out for that. But bok choy, Brussels sprouts, you want to cook those as well. Collards, cook spinach, kale. Also want to lightly cook your kale. So, and that can be either steamed, so you get the water simmering, have a little steamer thing, put the veggies on there, or you can just do a really thin amount of water, cook your veggies in the water, and then you can put your fats on after. So if you do butter or some different oils, things like that, don't cook with the fat. Low sugar fruit. So asparagus, broccoli. We cover those. Carrots, celery, cucumbers, dark lettuces, fennel radish, artichokes. Love artichokes. Green beans. Actually, my Viome. So anyone done their Viome test on here? Let's see. Looks like a couple have. But yeah, Viome, that was one thing on my Reduce was green beans. They're a little bit more starchy. But some are squash, zucchini, some of the low sugar fruits. So these are all on the green side for the most part. Blackberries, cranberries, grapefruit, lemon, lime, passion fruit, raspberry, strawberry. And then when you get into the more average sugar content, you have apples, apricots, some of those fruits you can see there. Then the high sugar ones that you want to somewhat avoid. So beets, corn, so fresh corn on the cob, okay as far as a vegetable, okay if it's coming from a really good source. It's one of the most common genetically modified foods. And also there can be mold spores from the hair and the wrap that it's in. You have peas, plantains, sweet potatoes, winter squash, yams. Then you get into more the higher sugars, and like potato mushrooms, they can have a little bit of mold on them. Canned fruits, canned vegetables, avoid those as much as possible. Anything that comes out of can is not ideal. Spices or flavoring, apple cider vinegar, sea salt, ginger, cilantro, parsley, oregano, turmeric, rosemary, lavender, thyme, cinnamon, allspice, cloves. You got, a lot of great things there. But then when you get into, more the other side of things, there can be more molds that accumulate in them. One thing that you want to avoid is if you're ever like steaming something and you're pouring your spices in there, what'll happen is that steam can get up into that shaker, and then you can actually develop moisture, and then that can ruin the spice, but also cause mold spores to start growing there. So avoid sprinkling over your food when it's steaming. Some additional, so cooking, let's talk about how to cook these foods. So good way to eat. So raw and not cooked. If you're doing, there's a lot of good vegetables that you can look at. Steamed is probably ideal for most your cruciferous vegetables, spinach, a lot of those things. Best to lightly cook or lightly steam. Heated baked at 350 or below is ideal. Lightly grilled, not charred, boiled or poached. So these are all on the green spectrum. So notice that as you get more and more on the far end of breaking down foods or heating it up, charcoaling it, barbecuing it, blackening, deep frying or microwave, that causes the proteins to denature even more, and so that can make it worse. So there's actually studies that have shown, though, cooking can help denature the proteins and make them more bioavailable. So that's shown with proteins. When you're cooking that, 51% digestibility goes from 51 to 90% when cooked versus raw. Energetic benefit of cooking increases bioavailable by 78%. So food prepping. So here's some ideas on some foods. So green leafy vegetables and cruciferous vegetables like broccoli is associated with a reduced rate of cognitive decline. So like I said before, with your cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, make sure you lightly cook those, steam them is best. Mediterranean diet had a 28% lower risk of developing MCI and a 48% lower risk of progressing from MCI to Alzheimer's disease. So that more fresh meats, clean meats, and a higher vegetable content is really ideal. Eating vegetables, legumes, fruits, fish, olive oil, moderate amount of alcohol, dairy products, lean meat, and protein. So let's look at kind of how your blood sugar will flow throughout the day, and we'll probably kind of this will be our. Let me make sure I got everything. All right. So here's a blood sugar chart. So when you have, so you can use skip a meal, restrict calories or carbs, or exercise on an empty stomach. That will actually help regulate your blood sugar better. Too many calories or carbs, you're going to cause your blood sugar to spike. So if you have a lot of calories, even if they're clean calories, sometimes your blood sugar will elevate just based on calorie count. Now, we're not talking about counting calories, but if you're eating huge loads of food, that can spike blood sugar, especially if a lot of it's protein or obviously starches. You'll have blood sugar spikes, all these. So if you have too many calories, blood sugar is going to spike and your body's going to store fat. Insulin is a fat storing hormone. So your blood sugar goes up. Your pancreas says, oh, we need to get that down. Insulin comes in and it'll cause it to drop. And then you're going to start storing fat with all that excess energy. Whereas if you can either skip a meal, restrict calories or carbs, or exercise on an empty stomach, exercising on an empty stomach is a great way to keep your blood sugar low. Body burns muscle and holds on to fat, energy crashes, and cravings increase. So that's one thing that if you're continuously doing that, so you want to stay in this stable area. So body releases fat, proteins, lean muscle, eliminates cravings, and increased energy. So if you can, exercising on an empty stomach's fine, but then after that, you should probably get a little bit of moderate protein, moderate fats to help with your body storage, so you can stay stable throughout the day. If you're restricting calories or doing time restricted eating that Reagan talks a lot about, this can help with maintaining consistent blood sugar as well. All right, so some things that you guys can do to kind of take your blood sugar transformation to the next level. Start taking a food journal, get a glucometer or do a glucose test. Test your blood sugar, especially throughout the day. See what you're eating, what's changing, record those numbers, and then you can get a baseline and then set a goal. Say, okay, I want, your blood sugar fasting should not be over about 95, and maybe even lower, ideally in the high 80s on a fasting, 8 to 12 hour fast. And then, set a goal. If you're in the 120s or 100s or wherever you're at, see where you're at, and let's set a goal to get there. Set a strategy on what foods you're going to eat, what you're going to avoid, what exercises you can do, confront any obstacles, and get it done. So hopefully this was great information for you. We'll be back next week. Reagan will be handling next week. And thank you so much for joining us today. You all have a wonderful day.